Well, welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. Here's the story. A Delta Airlines pilot flying over Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan, and this was just a couple of weeks ago, filed a report with the Civil Aviation Daily Occurrence Office at Transport Canada. The Delta plane was flying at 39,000 feet, and the pilot reported that what they saw was well above them. This was just one of more than 1,200 sightings in Canada last year of a possible UFO. Later this month, before June 25th, after decades of UFOs being nothing more than fodder for Hollywood's big screen, or a figment of the imagination of the tinfoil-hatted conspiracy theorists, the U.S. government will reveal at least part of what they know, or at least part of what they're prepared to admit they know.
Nickel 6-1 Tango Logic, over.
Oh, got it! Woohoo!
Roger, there's troubleshooting.
Did you box moving target? No, I took it on.
Okay, well, if you have questions about what we just saw, so do I. Chris Rutkowski is an internationally recognized ufology researcher. That's as in UFOlogy researcher, a science writer. He's an educator. He's published 9 books about aliens and UFOs, and he works out of the University of Manitoba. Chris, thank you for being with us. What do you think we just saw?
You know, that's a very good question. First of all, thank you for having me on. It's very unusual. There's no question that the videos that have been bouncing around the internet recently, supposedly showing UFOs buzzing some ships off the coast of California and so forth, they're curious. Unfortunately, the videos by themselves have a number of interpretations. They don't automatically shout aliens. It suggests that something's being observed. And in conjunction with the reports from pilots who say that they had seen things basically flying circles around their jets, it does lend itself to some rather remarkable interpretations.
I mean, these voices that we're listening to, they are U.S. military pilots. It's not like there's some crackpot that just took a plane up and decided to phone in a report. I mean, these are official beings. Let's just take a listen to this second little bit of audio and video if we can.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude.
All right, there it is, a fleet of them, this pilot says. Look at these, dude. So I guess that's what I'm going to say to you too, Chris. It's quite astounding. It can't just be one of those things that are, well, you know, there was a bird in the area or another plane in the area. This is something else.
Well, yes and no. I mean, what people don't realize is that there had been an established drone base that the military had created in the area. There's another video circulating that seemed to show a swarm of UFOs around the USS Omaha. And the idea is that these videos are being released not officially in the sense that the defense is saying, here's some videos of UFOs that we've been given. The videos have been sort of released secondhand, and the Pentagon has been saying, yes, they were actually taken by military personnel. They're not saying that what's on the screen is a UFO and truly unidentified. What the Pentagon actually says is that these videos are part of a study that was looking into advanced aerospace weaponry, and in doing so looked at some UFO videos like these. And so there's some hedging going on, some semantics going on. We're not entirely sure. And that's why we're looking forward to see exactly what this report is coming out to say in later on in June.
So, but we do know that much, that they did establish an advanced aerospace threat identification program, ATIP, that there was a military man that was head of that, Lou Elizondo.
Mhm.
He left his job in December, I think, 2017, and said, "You guys are hiding too much, and I'm going to expose it because we've got to start having this conversation because national security is a real thing. We have to wonder who these are."
Exactly. And there's some concern. I know Mark Rubio has said that perhaps he's worried that these are some sort of advanced weaponry from another country. There's been some suggestion that perhaps there's a real clandestine operation going on within the military itself, maybe testing to see if the personnel are really as good as they are. There's a lot of theories bouncing around. And although the idea of aliens has popped up from time to time, the Defense Department is very, very careful to say this has nothing to do with that. This is simply, as you mentioned, even the title of this program, Advanced Aerospace Threat. The concern is there's something going on that we're not entirely sure about, and we have to analyze, and we have to get better data.
They refer to the phrase, UFO is the common phrase that everybody uses. They use UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon. Is there a difference?
In this case, there's a subtle difference in that UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, can refer to anything that's detected that on radar that isn't supposed to be there, for example, or if the pilots are doing some training runs and there's something that's zipping by their plane, that's a UAP. In common parlance, it's UFO, unidentified flying object. It's very interesting that there's a shift away from UFO to UAP in the sense that the term UFO was developed by the United States Air Force in the 50s to move away from the fanciful term flying saucers. So now we have, let's go somewhere else, I suppose.
But it is amazing to me that after all these years of denials, you have presidents in the action, Barack Obama saying, let's find some stuff out. It was Harry Reid that set up this particular or this latest group to look at it. 60 Minutes, Fox News, CBC. The whole range of people are now starting to talk about this. And there was a lot of fear and stigma attached prior to that you were some, tinfoil hatted nut if you believed in this.
Absolutely. And what's most interesting, I think the reason why there's a lot of media interest in this right now, not the least of which is the fact that the United States government is admitting that it had this task force from 2007 to 2012 at the very least. But there had been a previous UFO study in the United States, of course, called Project Blue Book, and that ran up until 1968, 69, and its report was released in 1969. And since then, there has been kind of a black hole in the United States government where we don't know what's been done. And so this teasing that something actually was going on after the termination of that Project Blue Book that everybody's seen the TV show for, which was greatly sensationalized and didn't look anything like that. But since then, we didn't really know what was going on. And so these stories are leaking out. And now there's an admission that there was a task force. And the idea is that there probably still is something going on. We want to know what exactly is being done about UFOs. It makes sense, of course, that military personnel, pilots and so forth, they'll be seeing things and reporting things. And where does it go? Where does this information go? And the idea is that we'll find out supposedly on June the 25th, although who knows? Reports like this are sometimes delayed and sometimes sections are classified. In fact, there's one report I saw that Kamala Harris, who's, I think, ex officio in a way into some of these committees, might see a classified version sometime over the next few weeks as well. So, it's difficult to say what we're going to see. It's possible that there'll be some lists of UFO reports or UAP reports over the past 10 or 20 years. Perhaps there'll be some statistics. I wouldn't be at all surprised if there's a redacted section because it
sure.
makes sense that if there's maneuvers and let's say there's UFOs that are seen while on maneuver in Afghanistan, for example, one would rightly think that we're not going to get details on any of those. So I don't really know exactly what we're going to see, but it's going to be interesting at the very least.
But it's kind of a game changer to get to the point where there is an official admission that, yes, we're studying this. And so therefore, by definition, we're taking it seriously.
Absolutely. And, let's put the UFO as the aliens thing on the back burner for a while.
Yeah.
Just as plain simple, if there's some sort of technical glitch in radar that's making things show up, if there are some drones that have gone astray, or there's some secret programs, or let's say there's incursions by a foreign power, in any of those situations, one would think that the Pentagon would be deeply interested in this and should be investigating it. And I think that's the idea behind a lot of these reports.
A lot of people point to Elon Musk because he's putting all his satellites up there, and there's so much more activity in space that we're not even really aware of. We know our Wi-Fi is bouncing off of something, but we don't really know all of that. But these descriptions that we get from the American military personnel are objects at great speeds, objects hovering and going in directions that no piece of equipment that the Americans or the Russians or the Chinese, at least that they are aware of, could possibly carry out that maneuver.
Absolutely. And, I think we have to parse out the videos from what the pilots are seeing visually and reporting on. What the pilots are reporting, as you mentioned from the 60 Minutes segment, I have no idea what those pilots saw. It does not sound like a conventional object. It's very unusual. And one would think that pilots with significant hours of training in flight would be able to tell the difference between a regular plane and a regular drone and a weather balloon and whatever. So that's very interesting. I don't know about the videos. In fact, there have been a number of explanations that have been proposed by people for these videos, but it's the sightings and the sort of collateral reports by other pilots on board some of the ships that suggest something's going on. However, I have some red flags in that, according to one pilot, these objects were seen for weeks. And in fact, he said on the 60 Minutes segment, for years. And you're thinking, well, if there's an incursion of any kind by a foreign power in any airspace off the eastern seaboard of the United States, for example, that's acted upon immediately. There are incursions in the north and in Canada's north. Those are acted upon.
The Russians fly in there all the time just to test the system.
Absolutely. And we monitor that, and it's acted upon immediately, in some cases sending up other NORAD pilots to take a look. But if there's UFOs being seen off the coast of California for a period of 2 years every day, why has nothing been done about it, and why have we not heard about it since then? So,
but that was the question that Lou Elizondo was asking, which is every year governments spend hundreds of billions of dollars securing Washington. Quite a bit less, obviously, in Ottawa, but national security. I mean, they shut down the airspace if the president's going to move. Post 9/11, the world as we know it has changed in terms of how they deal with the airspace. So it's one of those two things. Like, why aren't they taking it more seriously if it's right there for the eye to see, at least some eyes to see? Or I guess the flip side of that is they still aren't really taking it seriously, or they would be doing something.
Yeah, one obvious explanation is they know exactly what these things are, and that's why they're not all that interested in it. But to me, it's still fascinating because let's look at commercial pilots. And for the example you led off with the Delta pilot flying from Anchorage to Minneapolis over Canadian airspace, had reported seeing a UFO, and we know that Transport Canada logs quite a few of these things out of. Every year, I know I look at dozens of UFOs. They actually Canada uses the term UFO in Transport Canada's descriptors, and pilots are reporting these things all the time. And actually, pilots are required to do so according to the flight manuals, to report UFOs. Now, the fact that Transport Canada has some of these, and that pilots do report them, it suggests that there's things up there that pilots are baffled about. And you'd have to think that if a commercial airline pilot with many hours of flying time sees an object that shouldn't be there, that in his or her opinion is not a plane, not a star, not a planet, not anything, that suggests that perhaps there's a danger to the people on board, passenger safety. If there's something, and actually there's a case of Porter Airlines flight from I think Ottawa to Toronto having to take evasive maneuvers because of a UFO that was directly in its path and injured some people on board because it had to take some invasive maneuvers. So if there's a threat, let's say we'll go the next step. It's not necessarily an object that's physically there, but the radar sometimes picks up things that shouldn't be there. So if it's a technical glitch, if it's something that's in the flight path that shouldn't be there, or something else entirely, I would say that that's worth looking into, and there should be some sort of investigating body or a committee to look at these things, at least here in Canada, because we have that data. We're actually more transparent than the United States in this regard.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Now, you do this on your own. I don't know if you've done a subsequent one, but there was a report in 2014 that you compiled, UFOs over Canada, 25 years of UFO reports here in Canada. So you went and were you able to get that data? Do you mean it was reported publicly, or it was reported to Transport Canada, or how did you discover that?
I actually put out an annual study called the Canadian UFO Survey.
Okay.
And I've been doing it, we're now in our 32nd year. We started in the 80s. We've now amassed more than 22,000 separate UFO reports in Canada from civilians and military personnel, pilots, air traffic controllers, police, you name it. They're in there. It works out to about 1,000 a year on average. And of that 1,000, most have explanations, or we don't have enough information to make a proper evaluation. But there's a handful every year that are well reported, well observed, and we're not entirely sure exactly what was seen. Now, it's a long way from that to start invoking aliens, but there's enough in there to suggest it would be worthwhile taking a closer look by the scientific community. I do get the reports through Transport Canada. I do get some through National Defense, but a lot of these come directly to us. They're reported on everything from popular UFO websites to media and everything in between.
So I remember, because of course this was home turf for me, but a farmer near Langenburg in Saskatchewan who came upon several metallic bowl-shaped objects spinning rapidly in a hayfield. The objects, he said, took off, left behind circular impressions. And this was before the kind of the crop circle event that happened in the UK that everybody saw. So what was the explanation for that in the end? Was there one?
There wasn't. In fact, that was 1974. I think it was September of 1974. A farmer by the name of Edwin Fuhrer. And like you say, it came upon these silver metallic upside down bowls that were spinning around. They took off one by one and left behind these swirled patches long before the advent of crop circles. And the RCMP investigated, and they could not come up with an explanation for what was seen, and it remains unexplained to this day. Oddly enough, even though people associate crop circles with Britain and places overseas, it turns out Canada has the title for the first crop circles or rings in the ground. Near Duhamel, Alberta, in 1967, National Defense actually investigated rings in a farmer's field and published its own report on it. There was a ministerial inquiry, as a matter of fact, into what was seen in Duhamel, Alberta. And so 1967 beats the crop circles in England for at least a decade or two.
So what has stood out? You mentioned the Porter incident recently. I'm looking at one here from 1915. A phantom invasion of unusual aerial objects caused panic through the National Capital Region. The lights on Parliament Hill were extinguished in order to prevent targeting by the enemy?
Yeah, I mean, the records go back fairly far. That particular one, prior to the First World War, there was, some concern that the enemy had managed to get across the Atlantic and was going to bomb Ottawa. So because people had started to see lights moving in the sky, the order went out to extinguish the lights on Parliament Hill and larger sections of Ottawa. We have many reports dating back throughout, not necessarily that far, but into the 1950s, 1947, 48. The RCAF investigated reports of flying saucers. They later transferred that responsibility to the National Research Council, worked in conjunction with the RCMP. And even that program just was phased out in 1995 before it was transferred to myself. So, there's this continuous record of studies into aerial phenomena in Canada and by a number of official bodies. And in many instances, after the investigations were complete of many cases, the RCMP and DND both said we don't have explanations for these particular cases. And what do you do with that? Because simply saying we don't know doesn't really offer any answers, but it does suggest that there's a real phenomenon that is going on fairly regularly and fairly often, and that drives the whole UFO mythology.
Mm-hmm. What are a couple of these incidents that have occurred that really have caught your fancy? I mean, this is what you do. You look at this 24/7. A couple of things must have stood out for you.
Oh, sure. And I've also gone back into history a little bit myself, but in 1967, a fellow by the name of Stefan Mihalik was doing some amateur prospecting in the area near Falcon Lake, Manitoba. And it's a long story, is quite detailed, but he basically saw a Hollywood-style flying saucer come down and land not too far away from him. He went up to it, touched the side of it. His rubberized glove melted. A blast of hot gas came out of this thing when it took off, set his clothes on fire, set fire to some pine needles and so forth. He was treated in hospital. The case was investigated by the RCMP, the RCAF. The United States Air Force actually came up to investigate. And the conclusions of the RCMP and the RCAF was, we have no idea what explanation there is. And what's curious is we have the medical records for this fellow. He was studied by the base doctors as well as civilian doctors. And at the site, there was actually radioactivity found that was tested by a number of laboratories, including the RCMP crime lab and labs in the United States and Canada. It has all the elements that you would want to see on a TV show, and it happened right here in Canada.
I don't know, you would know better, but the aficionados seem to say that Contact, the Jodie Foster movie, is the closest because she was dealing with radio frequencies, and that's really how most people are going to react if they see or experience one of these things. Certainly officialdom would do it, the pilots and whatnot. What do you think comes closest?
Well, that's a really good question. There's no question that the Jodie Foster version is what scientists believe will happen. And yet at the same time, chances are Contact, if it will occur, and this is all James Cameron speculation, probably will occur to an average person, a farmer or fisher person or somebody out of the way, not necessarily somebody who's sought out or seeking out from the best scientific minds. And if that happens, it's a very personal experience, and they might have a hard time convincing people that they actually had a contact. So it's a difficult situation, but my background's in astronomy, and I share the belief with most of my colleagues that there probably is life out there somewhere, maybe life that's advanced to a civilization like ours. Maybe there's a podcast going on somewhere on Tau CD right now. But we don't have a good way right now of traveling between the stars. We just don't have that technology. We don't even have any conceived notion of how that is possible in a reasonable short period of time. But it's possible, since our sun is an average star. There's stars out there that have a bit of a head start, let's say 1 million years. Maybe there's a civilization around one of those stars that has figured out not to break the laws of physics, but maybe to bend them or use them in a way we haven't imagined and travel around the universe. If so, would they come here? Would they deign to land on Parliament Hill? I have no idea.
They might go rushing back if they landed on Parliament Hill and
Absolutely.
listen to some of the debate. I probably shouldn't say that. So when in terms of where we're at, this department in Transport Canada that things are reported to, that the Delta pilot reported to, the Civil Aviation Daily Occurrence Office or section, whatever it is. So what happens to that? You read it, you look for it. Every once in a while, a reporter somewhere, decides to find a story, one of these sightings. But is there actually any substantive research going on in this country that you're aware of?
I would have to say no. In fact, probably my research is probably the most advanced in this regard.
That's why we're talking to you, because you're the guy.
Yeah. And it's too bad, because I think there's enough going on. There's enough scientific interest. I mean, every year there are dozens of master's and doctoral theses written about UFOs in one way or another in North America and other places around the world. There's enough data. I mentioned, we have 22,000 cases on record, enough data to be mined to try and understand, even if UFOs aren't a physical phenomenon, but they're a psychological or a sociological phenomenon. One would think that there's something worth studying there, because 1 in 10 Canadians believe they've seen UFOs, according to some polls. That's a significant number, and it suggests that there's good data out there to be realized. And it has been proposed a number of times over the years. I know that there's sort of a precedent to our discussion from 1969, a fellow by the name of Arthur Bray, who had a number of commissions in the Air Force and the Canadian Navy, gave a presentation to the Senate Committee on Science Policy, advocating that a research study be conducted. And in the year 2000, I made a similar proposal, and Art Eggleton, the Minister of Defense at the time, noted that as well. And even today, I mean, that's 20 years later, I think there should be some sort of body that handles these things. I mean, in the 50s and 60s, this was looked upon as a security issue or a military issue. That's sort of been the position of the United States. In Canada, we've approached it more from a scientific viewpoint. That's why the National Research Council was involved. And now Transport Canada is looking at it from the aspect of safety, which is another way of looking at the entire UFO.
No, I mean, birds can take a passenger jet down, right?
Absolutely. So I think there's enough reasons to form some sort of investigative body or committee to look into what's going on. And I'm hoping that all this interest right now might nudge us in that direction. And Canada is in a good position to take the lead on this, because a lot of the records are available of the National Research Council's work, the RCAF's work, and certainly now through Transport Canada and some other policies and regulations. So I think we're in a good position, and maybe Canada should take the lead on this.
Yeah, I agree with that. And where would you think it best? I mean, do you think it should be the National Research Council, or do you think it should be the military? Like, who's the
that's
best
a good
to handle
question.
this?
Yeah, I mean, the National Research Council was involved because its view was a lot of UFOs were lights in the sky that turned out to be meteors and eventually fall to the ground as meteorites. They sort of moved away from meteoritics towards the Canadian Space Agency, building Canadarms and that type of thing. So it does seem that the National Research Council and the CSA is probably not interested. But because a lot of pilots are reporting UFOs in the United States, that seems to be a trend now. Perhaps some combined work between Transport Canada and the FAA might be interesting to have a joint commission to look into this. But at the same time, there is scientific data that can be gleaned. In the States, they're looking at advanced aerospace technology, and a lot of scientific papers in physics and quantum mechanics were coming out of that. A boon in science would be definitely worthwhile for Canada as well.
I was interested that you said in Canada that we tend to look at this as more of a psychological phenomenon or a sociological phenomenon, and that unfortunately kind of plays into the crazy person theory, right? That if it's a psychological issue, then we don't have to take it quite as seriously.
Well, what I said was, if UFOs aren't physical, and they might be psychological and sociological, and in any of those cases, I think they're worth looking into scientifically. But yeah, I mean, we have to accept the fact that there is, some interest in UFOs as an alien technology of some sort. We don't have any proof or hard evidence to that effect, and yet we have to accept that that's been the discussion all along, and that's why it's often not taken seriously by science or indeed by politicians in general, because it's one of those things to laugh and joke about. But at the same time, enough people are seeing something and reporting it, and enough reports come through official channels from pilots who know what they're talking about, from air traffic controllers, and certainly other good observers. Many of the cases in the National Research Council files come from RCMP. And, these are people upon whom our lives are placed every day. And we respect them, and we value their opinions and observational capabilities. So either we value them to the point where we say, okay, let's study exactly what's being seen, or we dismiss them and then shoot ourselves in the foot, because then what value is that at all?
Yeah. I mean, you do see, I live in a part of the province, probably you do too, that, northern lights are a possibility, not as dramatic as if you go further north, but it does, when I was doing some reading, I came across this comment from Pascal, the 17th century mathematician, a very rational mind, a very rational person, who said the benefits of assuming God exists outweigh the drawbacks. And it seems to me the same for this. The benefits of assuming that UFOs exist kind of outweigh the drawbacks. It changes our vantage if we look at it that way.
Indeed. And you mentioned Elon Musk and his satellites. Well, every year, we're getting more and more reports from people seeing these satellites go up. Every month or so, 50 satellites go up as part of the Starlink program. And we are flooded with reports from people who see these things for the first time. And they look like glowing, chains of pearls in the sky, crossing the sky. And it's very spectacular. But people are saying, what is this? We don't know what these are. And raising awareness of people in general to what's in our own world, in the universe, is a very positive thing. This is a great opportunity for education. If it turns out that the UFOs do have conventional explanations, all the better, because it tells us exactly what people are seeing, what the capabilities are, and maybe there has to be some adjustment to some of the technology and flight plans that have gone astray. Drones are very common right now, LED lights, a whole series of things. So this is a perfect opportunity for people to get involved with actual pure science, using their own eyes.
And not surprisingly, the number of reportings went way up in this pandemic year, this last year, because people were at home. People were going for walks. People didn't have other stuff to do. So they might have actually been sitting in the backyard taking a look.
Absolutely. But as a matter of fact, I'm giving you a scoop, Pamela. You'll appreciate this. This is the big scoop. We're still in the midst of the pandemic here in Manitoba. We're still locked down pretty heavily. But the number of UFO reports so far for the first quarter of 2021 has dropped dramatically. So if the explanation for the increase in 2020 was pandemic, why are we seeing a decrease now? And I don't have a good answer for that. That's another reason to study them.
Absolutely. Now I'm looking at you here on this screen, and you've got some little ET kind of character over your shoulder there. Is that what it is?
Well, over there.
Yeah.
That's people probably are familiar with Reddit. Well, that's actually the alien mascot of Reddit. He actually has a name. It's called Snoo, as in what's Snoo. And you probably can see Marvin and a few other people.
You've got quite a collection.
Well, what do you get me for birthdays and Christmas? Really?
Yes, exactly.
I've got ties like you wouldn't believe.
I'm very curious about how you got into this and how we talked for a moment just about the stigma still attached to this. And for someone like you to take this on and write books and then collect the data and then come on shows and podcasts and talk about it, do you get heat? Do you feel that there's been a change and there's more acceptance now, or do you put on your tinfoil hat for Halloween, or how do you play this?
Well, it's precisely because I don't wear tinfoil hats, as a matter of course, that I approach the subject fairly straight. I've actually won outreach awards, actually from the university, for teaching the public about UFOs and astronomy. As a matter of fact, a lot of the bookshelves behind me just have tchotchkes rather than books, because I'm donating my collection of books and files to the University of Manitoba archives. They asked me to if I would be interested in doing that, and I said certainly. Wow. Because the idea is that it's a valuable resource. It's a part of Canadian history that we don't talk about really. Mm-hmm. It's sort of what people are seeing from coast to coast and north to south. What are people experiencing? It's a record of what's been in the sky and the military involvement. I became interested as an undergraduate student in university. I went into astronomy, and I didn't realize there were a lot of jobs. Weren't a lot of jobs in astronomy.
Not a good career choice.
Yeah, career choice. But I went into astronomy out of interest. And at that time, there were a lot of UFOs that were being reported, and people were calling into the astronomy department wanting to talk to professors about what they had seen. And my professors weren't enamored with UFOs at all. It was kind of an annoyance. So I, being a student, said, I'll take the calls for you then. Maybe I could get on their good side or something from doing that. And I ended up talking with people in their farmhouses and writing about what I had heard. And eventually I was asked to give a presentation to the physics department on what I had heard. And eventually that turned into public appearances and blossomed from there. And there's a scientific body. I mean, there's the University of Toronto had an Institute of Aerospace Studies that had a brief UFO program. Canada had two official UFO programs. One was Project Magnet and one was Project Second Story in the 50s, where the scientists and military people got together to talk about UFOs. So there are, there is a history of talking about this. And as far as my background goes, I'm advocating not necessarily that the aliens are coming run for the hills. I'm saying these are reports that have been filed by the average person. Some are investigated to the point where we can explain them. Some aren't. What can we learn about ourselves as human beings, as Canadians? And is there some scientific value? And personally, I think there is some scientific value, and that's my approach.
And at the end of the day, I mean, are you a believer?
Well, I alluded to the fact that with the astronomy background, I believe there's probably life out there somewhere.
Yeah.
You're probably asking the question, do I think that UFOs are alien spaceships? And I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen in any one of the 22,000 cases that I've looked at personally over the past 30 years or so, none of them jump out and say this is definitely an alien spacecraft. Some are very strange. I mentioned the one from Falcon Lake in 1967 that nobody seems to have a decent explanation for, and we certainly didn't have that kind of capability. And the case is still unexplained. There's a story of something that crashed off the coast of Nova Scotia in 1967 as well, that the RCMP investigated. In fact, the Canadian Navy sent in divers to try and retrieve whatever was there.
And did they?
The rumors say they grabbed something, but officially they didn't find anything.
Right.
But it's these rumors that really drive a lot of the UFO phenomena, and people are very passionate about this, and they really want to believe. And I think that's really important, that people are turning a little bit more to the heavens, maybe of a savior mentality. Maybe the aliens can figure out how to get us out of this pandemic easier than so far we've been able
but
to.
We're talking about all these other things of, life on Mars or life on the moon, or, maybe we'll commute and there's other places to work, so that if there is another pandemic, it doesn't have to be our bedroom to actually carry this off. So maybe we're just more open to it, to other possibilities. I mean, that is the one thing that technology affords us, is the ability to look beyond what these, more primitive borders usually contain, right?
I think maybe we are more open, and I think it's very good to have these kinds of discussions, and it allows us to really engage in some good discourse on the possibilities, and maybe it drives us. Matter of fact, like I said, we live in the James Cameron universe right now, where we expect that aliens are out there and they're coming to visit, or we can find them and turn on a TV or go to the movies, and whenever that comes, and be able to see aliens. And I think it's assumed that aliens are out there, and maybe that's a good thing. It drives us forward and keeps us humble at the same time, that maybe we're not the most advanced in the universe. Maybe there's somebody else out there who might have it together a little bit more than we.
Have you vacationed in Roswell, or?
My wife has been down to Roswell. I have not. But I've traveled to a lot of places where there have been some interesting things. In Canada, for example, at St. Paul, Alberta, we have a UFO landing site, which is at one point the first of its kind in the world. It was set up as a centennial project in 1967. So apparently nothing's landed there yet, but we're hoping.
It's an invitation. We're opening our arms and saying, pick us.
Yeah, and I've been to Shag Harbor. There's a nice little museum there, and I've been to BC on the island, where there was a number of sightings in the 70s and 80s. So I've been traveling quite a bit, and I've spoken at a few conferences. The interest is there. I think we have to accept that the subject does lend itself to having a lot of fun being poked at it, but at the same time, when you're talking about things that are being reported by pilots and air traffic controllers and people who should know what's in the sky and not, it sort of adds a little seriousness to it. And when Barack Obama was on a comedy talk show, and his first response when asked about UFOs was to make a joke of it. And then he said, but let's get serious for a moment. Yeah. I know that there's some things out there that we can't explain. And that comes from the former president of the United States. Yeah, no, I think that's the thing. It changes people's thinking. They're going, okay, which is what this report may do. Now, I'm just going to say to Paul, sometimes I ask Paul whether or not, because he's of a different generation than I am, so he may have seen all the movies. But so, Paul, is there a question that you want to ask? Here we go. I have a million questions. I prepped myself for this by watching Men in Black last night, which holds up just as a great movie. But no, I just have one comment, and it's on this Senate report that you mentioned from 1969. Yeah. I tried to find it, and within the annals of the Library of Parliament bureaucracy, I have yet to receive it. So I wonder... What are they hiding? I'll send you the link. I'll send you the link. Okay, you've read it. You've got a copy of it. I think it's time for another Senate study on this. Absolutely. Chris, thank you so much for being with us today. Chris Rutkowski, internationally recognized, folks.
ufology researcher. Is that how you say the word?
Yes.
Ufology. Science writer, educator, published books. So look some of those up. Visitations, Abductions, and Aliens, the Big Book of UFOs, When They Appeared. That was a 2019 book. So that's recent. We really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through this today. I'm interested. I can't wait till we see this report.
Me neither.
From the U.S. Okay, we'll be calling you back.
Okay, it's a deal.
Okay. Thanks again. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
joining us. That's it for this edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen.